Mike Hayes is the former commanding officer of SEAL Team 2. That means he led a 2,000-person special operations task force in Afghanistan. So 20 years with the SEALs. Then he was a White House fellow, serving as Director of Defense Policy and Strategy at the National Security Council under both Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. And by the way, to span two presidencies like that, it's quite unusual. You begin to understand it as you dive into his new book, Mission Driven: The Path to a Life of Purpose. I always wanted to know what that path was. Thank you for telling me, Mike.
Hey, Mike, let me just start by saying thank you for having me. Thanks for all the incredible impact that you've created on people, on your audiences, and just for this great nation. You and the Gist are amazing, and it's an honor to be here.
Wow. You've buttered me up unbelievably when people hire you to do corporate events. Is that the standard fare? Is that what you do?
Well, there's no hiring for me. It's just all contribution and helping out the nonprofits that I'm associated with.
So what I want to do in this interview is glean as many insights as possible. Then I'm going to pull back and ask you, and I know you'll engage because I've heard you talk to other interviewers with some meta questions. But let's just do this. Mission driven, the path to a life of purpose. You're a bit regimented about this, and it's a two-step process. First, you got to figure out who you are before you figure out what your life of purpose is going to be and how to get there. But who you are could mean a lot of things. How do you distill it? What tools do you use to get a person, a reader of your book or anyone else, to figure that out?
Yeah, Mike, great question. So the way I would summarize it is what my wife and I did for our daughter every day growing up when she went to school. We didn't ask her, what do you want to be when you grow up? We said, who do you want to be? And I just feel like the who is so much more important than the what. Even now when people say, I'm 54 years old. What do I want to be when I grow up? I don't know, but I want to keep working on my foundation and contributing to the organizations that I'm a part of and leaning into the hard things and learning and helping make others and make my team win. So, when you think about who you are, it should be defined really, in my view, around your core attributes. And that's like in the book, I don't have any answers for you. I just have the questions that will help people in that Socratic kind of way answer them for themselves.
What are I could figure some bad answers to who you are is just flipping the question and really answering what you are to sort of answer anything like your job title or how others see you. But what are some really good and maybe some unusual answers for who you are that would qualify as a good answer to that question?
Yeah, well, let me my answers for myself aren't necessarily anybody else's answer for themselves. So I want to be careful. A lot of times when we give mentoring advice, it's always that, hey, you should do what I did because I'm the smartest person I know. And that's just not ever the case. And so for me, I think about when you say, who is Mike Hayes? I think about being somebody who contributes more than I take. In the SEAL teams growing up, when I was 21 years old, I went through, what is arguably some of the hardest training in the world, 120 guys start my class, 19 finished. And the thing that I realized is that I focus more on what we say in the SEAL teams, teammate, self. And by focusing on your teams and your team and your teammate, it just lifts everybody up. And then you also get lifted up because you're in an elite, awesome organization. And so whether it's the SEALs, the White House, or Insight Partners where I am now, how do we all make each other better? And so at my core, what I try to do is be a person who gives more than I take.
Do you think that goes on at White Houses? You've been in a couple.
Yeah, it's a good question. And so, here's my experience in two administrations. It's that each and every administration has some really amazing people who are focused on absolutely the right things. And of course, there are some people who are focused more on themselves and them being out in front. And I would argue that the path to success is really the former, not the latter.
Aren't the former more easily manipulated by the latter? Someone who's in it for himself, probably has the same qualifications, looks great on paper, might be really probably in the White House is extremely smart and hardworking, and similar attributes for the SEALs. But if you're a little bit of an Iago, aren't you always going to be able to pull one over on an Othello?
Well, I think that in the short term, sure. You can always get hoodwinked in the short term, but in the long run, the world is a lot less imperfect, and we figure people out. The one thing that we have perfect radars for in our lives is when are people giving us feedback or criticism, or the things that you're referring to that lift us up or that tear us down. A lot of times, like in the SEALs, or I spent time at Bridgewater, world's largest hedge fund, or Insight Now. Like, what do? We look at the things that we do and say, how could we have done that better? That retrospective of looking back and saying, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? What did I learn? That's the way to incorporate and constantly make things better. And so that I think is the core. So sure, in the short term, you can absolutely get run over by some of these people who look out for themselves. But the more you see these people, the more you can recognize it a mile away. And it just never works out in the long run for these people.
Okay, what's your advice for someone who wants to be excellent and have the mission-driven life, but isn't in the position to join the greatest hedge fund, biggest hedge fund in the world, like Bridgewater or the White House or the SEALs, organizations that tout themselves, and with justification, as excellent, as hard to work in, but also as weeding out applicants? I'm thinking of someone who is driven to be a public school teacher. That's not necessarily the kind of organization where they eliminate 100 out of 120 applicants. So within that organization, where maybe one can coast, and I know you talk a lot about teachers, how does someone like that achieve excellence in mission-driven purpose?
Yeah. First of all, like we all have different gifts and abilities and skills and interests. And so there is zero judgment on the paths that we all choose and we all take. The world and the nation and our civic organizations, our neighborhoods, our states, our municipalities need people to be all different things. And so for me, I think about what is it that person who is the school teacher, the greeter at Walmart, the artist, the engineer, the hedge fund person, like that's the essence of the mission driven is how do you define success? And so, that I think is the teacher. I mean, I'm not a teacher as a profession, but I kind of pride myself on always trying to help and mentor people. My two sisters are both professional teachers. And I think that most teachers have an innate core metric of how much have I helped these students grow over the course of a year, rinse and repeat and keep doing that over the years. And so, when you're living that life of being mission driven, you're really doing it as making others better. And that's what I think every teacher does, to use your example.
So tell me about, aside from a large life philosophy, if there are a couple of very workable, manageable tips in there. One was the 1% better tip. Certainly, if you can apply that, you're going to get a lot better. Tell me about that.
Well, look, stepping back, you heard me say we spent time in D.C., so I know how to not answer the question you asked me, Mike. I'll start in one step to the left of that, which is when you think about in life, to leaning into the hard things is the path to learning, And so I think the world, whether it's corporate or just nonprofit or just neighborhoods and civic organizations, can think about like success and failure is binary. I think it's not binary. You have to if you fail and you learn, you just succeeded, and so that is the path to that 1% better. And the better you become, the more you can, achieve however you define success and achievement. If that's, like we were talking about earlier, helping others and contributing to others, that is that discipline, the dedication that it takes in order to lean in and try those hard things. It can be very challenging to take that harder path because we can either, just not want to do the work, or we could be afraid of what people are going to think of us if we try the hard thing and then classically fail, but learn. But I just think that 1% better is really foundational to a life that gets richer and richer through time. Because look, we all do things really well, and we all do make mistakes in life. How do we lean in and say, hey, you know what? I made a mistake. I would have done that differently if I had another chance. That's the sign of maturity and wisdom.
Yeah. By the way, I should note that not answering the question is another way of saying don't answer any question whose premise you don't agree with. And that was a lesson you learned from Madeleine Albright, right?
Yeah, it was. I was fortunate to be in a class of 14 White House Fellows. That's a program where you spend a year with 13 other amazing humans with all different walks of life, but then the class together has experiences with all of the leadership of the executive branch, and then some outsiders who by any definition of success, the world would consider successful. And so my class sat with Madeleine Albright, and it's off the record. She's obviously since passed away, and has a real legacy and of commitment and contribution to the nation. But that was one thing that I asked Madeleine. I said, if you could change anything or do anything differently, Madam Secretary, what would it be? And she said, yeah, in 1997, I think it was 97. Pardon me if I just got that wrong, but when we were in the bombing campaign around Kosovo, she got asked something about Americans that were bombing children. Instead of stopping to challenge the premise of that question, she went on and answered that question, which to the world kind of meant that she accepted the premise of that question.
Right. It was a 60 minutes interview, and she said it was worth it, when in fact, looking back, she should have said what you're just saying. Wait a minute, I reject the premise.
Yeah, like we're not, like America doesn't go and try to do this. We're defining an outcome of what we want. Sometimes as a nation we're successful, sometimes we fall short, but our goal is always to do the right thing. We could argue that and get political and whatnot. I'm not even being partisan right now, but through time, you don't have people who wake up and say, "What can I go screw up today?" We have people with different opinions and different paths to get places, but nobody wakes up and says, "Hi, what can I go screw up today?"
Yeah, your 13 other fellows, and maybe you know about classes before and after, how are they different from you in general?
Well, I think that any single class has a very helpfully diverse group of backgrounds. And so, of course, the word diversity can be electric, especially in today's day and age. But listen, what I would say is, setting all of that aside, it is impossible to argue that being around people with different experiences and backgrounds than you, it doesn't make you better. I know that when I got to sit around with Dan Fletcher, hair up, 17 miles high, and I'm the crisp, clean cut Navy SEAL. And, Dan's the youngest tenured, professor at UC Berkeley, and a molecular biologist that was like reversing the carbon cycle. Like, oh my gosh, like I never would have been in a room with Dan Fletcher while I was in the SEALs. The White House Fellows put me in a room with Dan Fletcher, and being around him made me so much better because we had different perspectives, and we just we just appreciate that different people are different.
That's why I asked, because I get the impression, it's not just the impression, I haven't gone over every list, but the White House Fellows are mostly selected, I think, for intellectual or academic achievement, and all credit to Holy Cross, great university, but you weren't of that ilk, or am I mistaking how they choose their fellows?
Well, so let's step back for 1 second. The fellowship is absolutely, you have to have a master's degree. Almost everybody's got some sort of degrees from reputable institutions. You don't have to have gone to an Ivy League school to be selected into the White House Fellowship. Certainly it skews that way, whether undergrad or graduate degree at times, but that's not a requirement. And so just like in the SEALs, physical was the bar, but mental was what got what got people through the training. Having a certain amount of intellectual horsepower certainly is a consideration in the White House Fellows. But what we're really doing is screening for people who are going to make the greatest impact for the nation and the world, and that's really predicated on not being for self-driven and a self-promoter, but instead living that life like I referred to earlier. So that's the foundation of the selection.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because it does seem to me that in our culture we have a meritocracy, but the meritocracy is so often defined through paths of academic success. Now, if you're picking 14 of the best people in the world, let's say, you can pick people with master's degrees from really, really good schools and still select for a whole bunch of other traits that you'd want to select for. But I just wonder if you've reflected on, and this is probably true with Bridgewater, they choose extremely smart people. With some of the organizations, the excellent organizations that you've been asked to advise or that you've been a part of, is there an over-reliance on the academic? Can we as a society find and cultivate excellence from avenues other than Ivy League schools or the
100%. Absolutely. I think that the most important traits are really the ones that you learn going through life. The book knowledge versus the learned knowledge is skews on paper toward the book knowledge in a lot of these big different positions. But the truth is that is far from a requisite. It's a we actually actively seek out people from all different backgrounds in the SEALs. It's the same thing in the White House Fellowship, and so I agree with. I think you're trying to maybe leading the witness a little bit here, Mike, and I am agreeing with you.
Well, the SEALs is what comes to mind. They don't have that. And then if you get through the SEALs program, to me, it's more of an imprimatur of future success than great accomplishment from a great school. Look at our Supreme Court. We have 9 justices. Yes, one went to Holy Cross, I'm just realizing. But they all went to Ivy League schools. And I wonder, or not Ivy League law schools. And I wonder, sure, let's just say they're 9 of the best possible candidates for that slot from an Ivy League school. But if we keep, I'm not bashing Ivy League schools. I love academics and intellectualism. But if this is the only funnel, how can we possibly get the best people to lead our country or to make our organizations the best they could be? And then the other question is, all right, if not that, and there's also the fact that when you get into an Ivy League school and succeed in an Ivy League school or an elite institution, it's somewhat of a proxy for a lot of the traits of hard work and self-sacrifice you're talking about to some degree. But if we have this as such a mainstay of defining success, isn't it putting our culture at a little bit of a disadvantage? But then what's the way to get out of that, if not the imprimatur, I'll use the word again, of such an institution?
Well, regardless of whether it's the SEALs or one of these institutions, all you're really seeing is a talent identification process. And so it isn't like in any of these organizations the formative the formative lessons are not the thing. I would argue, like for myself, sure, the SEALs largely made me who I am because of the 20 years worth of lessons that I learned. But the characteristics to be a SEAL were in me before I walked into SEAL training. And so all that happens is on the other side of that, whether you have this selection process that is like a little bit of a signal to the world. And so when the world is hiring, the point I think you're trying to make is, sure, we can look at SEALs or great academic institutions and look at that as a signal. It often and usually is a signal for some sort of talent. However, I think you're making an excellent point through your question, which is you don't have to have that, Ivy League or Navy SEAL or whatever kind of like talent marker in order to be talented. So how do we go find that from the rest of the world? It's often from seeing records of success. Do people try hard things, and do they have the drive and the desire and the work ethic? I think that EQ and work ethic takes you way farther than any sort of an additional 10 points on anyone's IQ.
Absolutely. I do too. But what's the way to identify that so that such a person with off the charts EQ and work ethic, someone in the 99th percentile of that, is as identified as potentially a person who could help an organization or lead an organization as much as credentialism? Because this is, as I'm reading your book, I'm saying to myself, this is great. A lot of people would get a lot out of it, but how do you scale this for a culture that has had a lot of elite failure? And I think as part of the elite failure, we've had a lot of elite success too. But I think a part of the elite failure is who we define as elites. These are just some of the questions I had, so I thought I'd throw it to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, look, here's the very personal and honest answer is like, I'm that person. I'm not the smartest person. I don't have the highest IQ in the world. Like, I know people who are really, really smart. I'm not them, and I'm a person who sees a vision and is ready to work to go achieve something. In the book you might have read, Dan Hurley, the coach of the UConn basketball team, is a dear friend. He read my first book and then asked me to come in and speak to the team. And I've been very close to the UConn basketball team over the last couple of years, and they've won a couple national championships. The thing that I go in there and when I talk to the team, I think about, if you can visualize something, then you can achieve it. It's only a question of what price are you willing to pay to go achieve your goals. When I got into SEAL training, I knew I was going to make it through. Sure, everybody, it's really hard and it's blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't care. To me, my answer to my question was, I will pay any price that it takes to go be a SEAL. Whatever the edge of human misery is that it requires, I'm ready to do that. And so if you want to win a national championship, it's the same thing. What price are you willing to pay? And that work ethic does help you rise to the top. So in many respects, I think, Mike, I am the answer to your question. And there are a lot of me's out there, a lot of people who don't have the highest IQ that just are ready to have that work ethic. I think it's not harder than that.
When you advised Danny Hurley and he decided not to take the job of the LA Lakers, had you already established and worked out your, I think it's like 15-point plan of how to determine what's a great fit for the next job? Or did working with Hurley help you develop that, and some of the things you told him and he put into practice now winds up in the book?
No. The book was formed very much years and years and years ago. I've been asked for many years to help SEALs transition from the SEALs, or like, hey, I'm getting out. How do I think about this? Or I've been in senior managerial roles for over 10 years in the private sector, and you just think the thing that I care the most about are my teammates, and I want them to work in my organization and as part of my team as long as possible. But when their goals diverge from being on the team, then I want to help set them up to go do the next great thing that's going to help set themselves up for their great life. And so, like, when I was talking to Coach Hurley, Dan, it was never a frameworked conversation. It was, and I don't have the answers. Just like in Mission Driven, I do not postulate any sort of like, you need to go do X, Y, Z. It was more of like, hey, how much do you value things like, having impact on someone's life and being able to shape them? A 19-year-old college student versus a 27-year-old NBA 100 millionaire are two very different archetypes, and so like that's just like one dimension of the consideration. And so those were the kinds of questions that I would throw at Coach Hurley in that situation. But anybody who's considering any sort of a transition is thinking through things like geography, compensation, or what type of organization are you in, or how much do you care about public recognition? Does that matter to you? What about size of the firm that you're in, et cetera, et cetera? I could go on, but those are the questions.
Do you think Danny Hurley, or extrapolate out others in his position? So not the person who just gets out of the SEALs, but someone established and has a fork in the road, but they're two great choices. Do you think others like him, were looking to you to change his mind or to pretty much confirm what he was already inclined to do?
Well, I think the best people triangulate their decisions. And so we often have a gut feeling of what will be right, but what's hard is to say, why is something a gut feeling? And usually, your gut, if you think about what's the logic for what you're defining, it's why are you feeling the way you are? And can you put it into words and into a sentence? And so I think a lot of times people need a little bit of outside help thinking, well, how do you crystallize that? In these situations of, am I looking to get somebody to tell me that I'm making the right decision, or hey, help change my mind? Kind of back to the Madeleine Albright thing. The premise of that is that person has already made a choice. Many times they haven't, and I'll tell you, even when I hung up with Dan on a Sunday night, and he hadn't, I think he announced this thing on like a Monday morning, even he would say like, I don't have my final decision made yet. And I'm like, listen, here's just some of the questions. And so I think having that open-minded, like, open-minded exploration of what is best for you is really important.
You weren't working JJ Redick on the other line, were you?
Now listen,
getting a fee
I don't
from the
want to
buses.
overstate. No, I don't want to overstate this either. I was one conversation
Right,
of like
right.
of many conversations that Coach Hurley had. Like it wasn't like the Mike Hayes. Like, look, I'm a small part. I'm a molecule in the decision making process. I don't want to
Yeah.
overstate it.
So a couple times in the conversation, you mentioned IQ because we were talking about intellect and meritocracy. And so how I think of it is IQ is really imperfect, but it's an attempt to affix an empirical number on this concept of intellect, which we can debate what that means and what goes into it. There's no such number, or there's not really even such a concept with grit. But is it possible, and I might be using an inexact term, but you go into the SEALs and you just say to yourself, I'm not quitting. And I bet you, of the 121 guys in your class, probably 120 of them were saying something similar. But you make it out for a number of reasons. But also, I would surmise that you're probably in the top 1% of this quality called grit. If we had a grit score, maybe we would say something like Mike Hayes, well, of course he's going to succeed. Look at his off the chart grit. Do you think that grit you can pull someone from the 20th percent to the 80th percent? Do you think that's possible? I think that there's a lot of innate there's a lot that's innate even to a quality like grit and hard work.
I think it's nature and nurture, Mike. I think you're putting your finger on something really wise. Like, let's go back to Dan Hurley. Like, that dude has on a scale of 1 to 100, he's 150 in grit. You know, talk about and so whether it's Dan Hurley, Mike Hayes, or anybody else, what is grit? Grit is really it is thinking about what are the mistakes that you've made in your past life and that you've learned from, that you incorporate in and say, okay, I'm not going to make that mistake again, so that I don't need to do that hard thing again. The L in SEAL, I joke around, stands for lazy. Like, we make a lot of mistakes, but we never make the same ones twice. Never. You know, and if we do, that's a problem. And so, you know, the grit factor comes from knowing that you are in a really hard situation, and you've been in a lot of hard situations before in your life, and you're drawing on that wisdom and that gut that we were talking about before to say that shape what you think you should be doing in that moment. If you use that basketball analogy, like, the reason Coach Hurley can win national championships is because he's got decades of experience and he's pattern matching to say, I've seen a movie like this before. You know, you're never in the exact same situation twice, different players, different, you know, environmentals, but you're drawing on those years and years of looking at what went right, what went wrong, studying it, and being a student of your craft, and saying, you know what, I'm compounding my knowledge through time, and then it makes it easy to have grit because you're so determined to achieve the goal, whatever it is that you're defining as your success.
And you think grit as a quality can be cultivated and increased even in adults, even in 30-year-olds or people whose older cortices have developed?
No doubt, because look, I was not the most experienced SEAL coming out of SEAL training at age 22. You know, it wasn't until after 9/11 where most of us got put really through the ringer. And sure, you can go through Hell Week and be up from Sunday morning to Friday afternoon and realize that no matter how hard something is, that you won't quit. But the thing is, like, when you're in these really tough situations, you realize that you can always stretch yourself further. If I really break it down, in SEAL training, we stretch people beyond their limit, and then we get them comfortable. Mm-hmm. We stretch them beyond their limit again. We get them comfortable, et cetera, et cetera. And what you're thinking is, sure, you're stretching your limits. True. But what you're really doing, Mike, is you're helping people, you're putting people in a situation that's really hard and saying, hey, go survive and figure it out. And that pattern, like, incorporates into someone's grit factor, so that at my point in life now, I know that I've done a lot of things in life that very few people can do. But to be clear, there's way more I can't do than I can do, and there's a lot of people that can do way more things that I could never do. But the fact is, I've been in so many different hard situations that when I have a hard situation in front of me, I've trained myself to be calm, to think about the outcome and to think about what do we want out of this situation. Because if we're not calm, all we're doing is wasting our energy and reducing the chances of achieving whatever it is we're trying to achieve. And so, yes, I've gotten better at that every year of my life.
Yeah, everything you say seems possible, but I have been recently thinking and researching a lot about the GLP-1 drugs, and they seem to go exactly at what we used to call character. And so there were qualities like willpower that very much correlate to grit. And it turns out that if you, and they're not 100% sure how it works, but if you tweak a little of the body's mechanism, then a person without much willpower can turn out to have willpower, or what seems like willpower. I don't know. It seems to me like everything you're saying is true and people could get inspiration off it. But I also think that there is so much innate, and to some degree, I wouldn't want to give up, but where not fully grappling with, I was going to say fooling ourselves, but we're not fully grappling with how impossible some of this stuff is for a certain kind of person.
Yeah. Look, the way I would explain it, and I've said in the past, probably not eloquently enough, but there's some cone of, I don't know how to show my hands here on screen, but some cone of potential outcomes that we all can have in any given thing.
Yeah.
And where we land in that cone is a function of that training that we're talking about. But I agree with you. Look, I mean, I'm never going to play in the NFL or the NBA, like I just like that, like that's outside my cone, like, so whatever given abilities that we have, there is an element of that we are capped at certain things, and so, but the beauty of life is, do we train and work to land on that highest possible part of that cone, but more importantly, also in the areas that give us energy and help us be better.
Right, because I agree with that. Otherwise, the other argument would be, well, there's no such thing as inspiration, right? There's no such thing as doing better tomorrow than you did yesterday. And I do not subscribe to that. So I want to ask you this. Your last book was called Never Enough, a Navy SEAL commander on living a life of excellence, agility, and meaning. Never enough. Now, I had heard an old interview where you said your next book was going to be called, I think, Always Enough?
Yeah, that must have been a really long time ago. But look, let me start with Never Enough, man. My mom hated the title. She's like, "Why, Michael?" And there was only a couple people that call me the full Michael.
Yeah,
but
you're priest
why
too,
would
right?
I ever? Yeah. Why would I ever go buy a book that says that I'm not enough? And I do clarify early on in there, like, what do you really mean? It's like you have to feel like you are enough at any given moment, but also have that kind of what you're talking about, that struggle, that drive, that desire, that grit to go be more. And what does being more mean? It's not my definition of whatever being more is. Some people think it's having more money, or some people think it's having more followers on Instagram, and some people think it's having more impact for the nation. I don't sit here and judge. We're all different. So that was the first book, and I ended up writing Mission Driven because of a lot of conversations after Never Enough.
So was Mission Driven going to be the book, or is Mission Driven the book that Always Enough was going to be, or that's a different idea?
Well, Mike, I wrote Never Enough because I've had a bunch of near-death experiences. I've been shot at, I've been rocketed, I've amputated a teammate's leg, I've been held at gunpoint in '96 in Peru long before 9/11, and threatened with execution and torture and really bad stuff. And I don't know, I could keep going on. I've got dozens of those types of experiences, and to some degree, any of my military peers who have served in Iraq or Afghanistan have gotten in vehicles and ridden over roads that you don't know if you could be instantaneously vaporized and blown up. And when you have lived that kind of a life, and you say, well, I even know that I died, or you have some of these near-death experiences, the thing that you think about is, of course, your family. But the other thing is, like, at least what I always thought about is, like, I've been privileged to have some of these really awesome and really hard experiences. Did I share it and help others? And the answer before I wrote Never Enough was no. To some degree, when I wrote that book, this will sound weird, but I felt like okay, if I'm in that near death experience again, I'm not going to have that on my mind because I got my thoughts down and got it out to the world. I never planned on writing a book. I never planned on writing a second book, but it just that, when it was just the way to have impact on people that I've never met, and I thought a great way to contribute to the nation. And I think you probably know this, but I donated all the profits from Never Enough. I get overpaid to speak in public from time to time, and all the profits from Mission Driven go to a 501c3 charity I started that pays off mortgages for Gold Star widows. And so I don't.
How many
make
have
a
you paid
penny
off so far?
Yeah, we paid off 12.
Yeah.
I say there's no full-time employees. It's a very quiet, organization that goes and helps. And so 12 women's mortgages have been paid off. And while the husbands have, succumbed and paid that ultimate sacrifice, it's the widows and the children that continue to pay that ultimate sacrifice every day. And to my every remaining day on this planet, I will think about my brothers and teammates that I don't have with me, and I may seem somewhat normal, but I carry a ton of weight from all of this, and so I'm here to do as much as I can to honor and recognize them and to help those families that have paid that ultimate sacrifice and continue to.
While I have you, I want to ask about a column that David Brooks really wrote. And I read your book and I was reading the column at the same time. And I said, I got to ask Mike about this. So he writes about certain struggles, the struggle between excellence and superiority. Some people's longings are non-comparative. If they're good at something, that satisfaction is its own reward. Other people's longings are primarily competitive. It's not enough for them to be good. They need to be better than. They need to come out on top of someone else. I notice an awful lot, this is Brooks writing, of competitive striving for superiority in the world. Our entire meritocracy is built around striving for superiority. It's not that you're good. What matters most is that you're ranked higher. How do you think about that? Because I think that there is something about superiority to even strive for that has merit. I don't know if the SEALs and their weeding out process was such that we're just going to weed out those who don't make it. And in some classes, 80% make it. Or if they had a threshold where in every class we have to fail at least half. But if you don't strive for superiority, you're not going to make it through, I would imagine.
Yeah, let's separate two concepts. Let's separate striving for superiority with the comparison point you're making. Because to me, what I think life is about is the way that I approached my 4-mile timed runs in SEAL training. I wasn't trying to beat any of my classmates. I was just trying to always beat myself. And so when I'm doing anything hard, it isn't about me doing better than anybody else. In fact, I hope everybody else has their best day also. And so the underlying theme between the I need to be better than someone else is really rooted in ego or perception. How do we present ourselves to the world? What I would argue is that when you really truly have confidence, it doesn't matter how you look to anyone else, because like the proudest days that I have are when I stand in front of a room and say, hey, I don't have the answer to that. I don't know, or your idea is better than mine. Because when I'm a leader of an organization, the outcome of the organization is my success. I don't need my name associated with that success. I need my organization to win. And if that's the way everybody in a team works, then that makes the team elite. So the trait that you're describing of I need to look better than somebody else is, in my view, the fastest path to toxicity and failure.
Did you do SEER training in the SEALs?
It's funny you asked. Wow, you've really done your homework. No, I haven't, is to answer your question. In 1996, I was held at gunpoint. I had and threatened with execution. This was in Lima, Peru. It's a longer story for a different day, but I lived through a SEER training situation. And so actually, when I came back, I was not a graduate of SEER school, but I was asked to go become to help, and not necessarily not an instructor. That's like a full-time job, but to help talk to them and say, hey, what'd you learn? In 96, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot happening with the military. It was peacetime. Yeah. And so whenever we did have these little situations or skirmishes or different situations, we always asked ourselves, what could we learn from this? And candidly, I did a lot right in that situation. And so did my swim buddy, my teammate that I was with. And
by instinct, by other other training that you have that wasn't SEER?
Well, I'd say that's a good question. I've never really thought of it that way. I think the foundation of SEAL training was what gave me the ability to succeed in that situation. Because what I did was I thought to myself, if I were them, what would make them need to kill someone like me?
Right.
And so, because they had the three things that you learn in basic SEAL training, the successful traits of an ambush are surprise, superior firepower, and violence of action. These people had all three of those, and we were caught flat-footed, and we learned a lot from it. And so again, it's a story for another day. But what matters is, can you look at a situation like that and say, what went right, and what would I have done differently if I could do it over again?
Wow. Such stories, such wisdom. The name of the book is Mission Driven: The Path to a Life of Purpose. Mike Hayes, thank you so much.
Mike, thank you so much. Appreciate being here. And thank you to everybody listening.
Thank you.